The sooner that you can start properly using a pair of lifting straps and a belt, the better. Most of the people who are overly concerned with qualifying all of their lifts as saying, well, I do it without straps and I do it without a belt, therefore it's more real strength and more manly and more impressive than your lift that's 200 pounds heavier than mine and you use straps for it. Those are the types of people who had aspirations of being strong and it never went anywhere. So when they see you mogging them into oblivion, in their mind, just because their grip is stronger, they're manlier than you and their lift is more impressive. Don't listen to those DLs. Don't listen to those weenies. Use straps to make sure that your grip isn't the limiting factor in working your back or your posterior chain. And use a lifting belt just because it helps you lift more. It gives you more ab engagement. It helps you then acquire more hypertrophy because you're using more weight through the same tempo and the same range of motion. The only thing is that your muscles just get to work harder. Don't listen to those booger ass lifters. That's the opinion piece for today. You let me know how you feel about it. I enjoyed that one. I enjoyed that opinion piece. You tell me how you feel about that. Give me a good argument for why your strapless, beltless lift is superior to me lifting way more weight than you. Anyway, awesome questions. We're going to start with, what would your physique look like if you practiced overhead press primarily over bench? So I feel like there wouldn't be a really big difference per se, just because people talk about my delt size all the time and how it's just developed from every head. That really honestly came mostly from bench press and row variations. So I feel like the only difference would be maybe a little extra upper back development, because that's like an antagonist support muscle that's recruited a little more actively on an overhead press, I guess. But other than that, you really wouldn't see really too much of a difference, other than at the same relative level of development, your overhead press would be better than mine just because you practice one primarily over the other. But you'd have a pretty big overhead press and a pretty big bench. You'd look jacked, I guess. So if that's what you want to do, man, go for it. Next question. High intensity, high frequency training causing overreaching. Is this something that I need to worry about? So in your particular instance, bro, you're working with the scenario where, and this is a guy that I've been chatting with back and forth on Instagram for a while now. I believe you're in India where some of the gyms are still shut down, so you're not able to really squat or deadlift or do any lower body exercises at all. And you're just doing the weighted calisthenics to, be able to train and be active still. I definitely think you can overtrain and overreach in any particular training system. But if you're only training your upper body, it's going to be harder to overtrain versus if you were training your upper body and your lower body. Ricky Stick said something in the past about how it's just common sense shit, where like if you're only working your upper body, you're going to be able to push yourself harder than if you're not training your legs, you know what I mean? So you're going to be able to use more intensity for sure, like you said, and more frequency. The only thing that I would really pay attention to in your particular circumstance is maybe using the same movement patterns over and over again. So by that I mean, I would just change up the grips, your grip width, the type of grip that you're taking, maybe the ranges of motion that you're using. So like full range of motion weighted pull-ups, then like just chin over the bar pull-ups, and then maybe like some bodybuilder style partial pull-ups could be some variations that you're using. And then you would just apply the same logic to your push-ups and your weighted dips. I don't think that you would really overreach outside of just paying attention to certain shit that you're gonna have to pay attention to with any training system, and that's your movement variability, like their variation of movements. I love this question. This is gonna be the highlight of the video in my opinion, but best Oonga Bunga exercises to where you can just hammer out reps, not really worry about RPE or worry about form. So I don't want you to ever not worry about form to the extent where I want you to use like a standardized rep quality. Like never let your reps go to shit just in favor of doing more reps. One quality rep is worth 12 shit reps. It's like an overstatement, but the point is that if you're doing a rep with a good cadence, that's infinitely more hypertrophic than a shittier rep, you know what I mean? to the point where if you're only doing shittier reps, you can progressively overload just by doing better quality reps. So never stop worrying about your rep quality. Erase that from your mind. But if you're just looking to push hard, caveman style, here are a few of my favorites. Belt squats, go to town on those. You're not doing anything but using your legs. Your legs can take a lot more volume and punishment than you think they would be able to. You're not beating up your lower back at all. So what you're left with is an exercise where you can really push your legs, especially if you have a setup like the one I use. I got it from Kahlua Iron. Johnny Candido talked about it in his home gym belt squat video. I use that one and I'm able to get ATG on it. If you're only parallel on belt squats, I somewhat feel like it's not as good as leg press, which is another Oonga Bunga exercise I like, but it's still worth doing just because it's free leg tonnage if you don't have a leg press, if you're training at home, for example. If you're in a gym, low key, Smith machine hack squats are amazing for the quads, and you can just beat the shit out of your legs with them Oonga Bunga style. You can still use RPE. So when I say just beat the books on stuff and just go Oonga Bunga, I'm never saying RPE is never warranted with that exercise. This is just an exercise that really favors the Oonga Bunga like play set. You know what I'm saying? Another good one is tricep rope push downs. Those are really Oonga Bunga, just because the harder you push on them and the more reps you do, it just seems like it's just infinitely beneficial to recovery on your elbow. It's like the more reps you do, the more blood you get pumping through your elbow. The more reps you do, the stronger you get. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a win-win. I think another one, low key, could be push-ups, especially higher rep push-up work. One more. So we did, I think another one could be back extensions, man, quite honestly, especially again if you're using higher reps. So those are my favorite Oonga Bunga exercises. Throw them in your program liberally, you're gonna get some good gains from them. What is your opinion on the conjugate method? So the conjugate method isn't, it's very well thought out. You're hitting just different capacities to make yourself a really well-rounded lifter. In my opinion, I don't think that people's implementation of it is the best, but people's implementation of a lot of training systems isn't the best. You could use the Berserk method, and if you don't really know what the fuck you're doing, you're gonna make it look terrible. I think that conjugate appeals to that teenage lifter that doesn't really know what they're doing, just because people conflate it as just mindless heavy lifting. It's not what the conjugate method is. There's all these idiosyncrasies that went into the system. That being said, I do think that with a lot of the max effort variations, a lot of the original disciples of conjugate and West Side kind of got, I'm not trying to use a gigabrain term, but they got ahead of themselves. So like the triple banded, single ply, high box squat to reverse bands with chains, like even Dave Tate makes memes about how a lift can be conjugate as fuck if there's just a bunch of ridiculous add-ons to it. But a lot of people unironically run max effort systems that use those exercises. So I do feel like it's more meme worthy just because a lot of, quite honestly, idiots run the system. I'm not going to mince words. A lot of fucking stupid people run that system. But when it's ran well and when it's implemented well, we have things like the Matt Winning way of implementing it. You can have your opinion about him making you subscribe to Patreon for asking him what kind of steak he likes to eat. No bullshit. I can show y'all a screenshot where I saw him say, you got to subscribe to my Patreon to see what kind of steak I ate. You can feel how you feel about him personally, but his training style is really well-rounded. The winning warm-ups, I don't use them per se, but I do really high rep warm-ups before my training to help me prime myself to lift. All his periodization and exercise selection, his heavy use of belt squats, all excellent. Alex from Alpha Destiny, his implementation of conjugate, really well done. That's probably the most well-rounded system that I've seen in terms of like what uses conjugate as its base. Dave Tate, like I could go on and on, but people who use it well make it look good. People who don't, the DLs fuck up everything no matter where you go. What is the optimal time of day to train? So it's really a question you got to ask yourself, bro. You got to look at it like from a few different perspectives. So how late is your last meal and how soon in the morning do you eat? If you eat really late at night, say like 12 p.m. right before you go to bed, you could train in the morning pretty well because you still have those calories, those carbs and everything that you ate from the night before fueling you into the day. To where you could have like a small pre-workout meal that's just some fast digesting carbs, and you would do well with that. Also, you have to remember, like, am I a morning person? When I wake up in the morning, am I sluggish for hours and hours to the point where if I trained, it wouldn't be a good training session. If you're someone that's sluggish in the morning, you may find that, irrespective of when your last meal is, it may be better for you to train later in the day. It really is a question that you have to ask yourself. Look at certain KPIs, and if it checks out, train in the morning. If it doesn't, train later in the day. There's really no optimal time, bro. It's like that's approaching galaxy brain, in my opinion, just because there are tons of people who train in overnight working schedules where like they're asleep during the day. That's totally opposite of what a human being should do, but they still train, you know what I mean? And they still get good results with suboptimal sleep and everything. So don't overthink it. Don't fall into the cult of gigabrain. Next question. Should you switch emphasis in your branded general strength program? For example, if I start with bench/deadlift first, should I then switch to overhead press/squat? So that's a great question. I'm always someone that says that you should keep your training program relatively the same every time you run it, except for just changing accessories like every 8 weeks. So if you notice that you want to start working on your overhead press and your squat a little bit more, well, that's kind of the question that answers itself. If you take that principle in mind and you want to work on your overhead press a little bit more, you could just add it as one of the accessories that you're using in your bench-oriented program. You don't just suddenly make your program overhead press oriented, you know what I mean? You want to keep that thread of progression consistent until the moment arises that you absolutely just want to focus on your overhead press over bench. But you're asking this question because you're nonverbal communication. You're asking me, okay, I'm going this long without squatting or overhead pressing, which I don't tell you to do. I just tell you to emphasize one or the other, but you may have already done that anyway, and you don't want to detrain your overhead press and your squat. Well, you just include them as an accessory. All the branded program is surrounded around in terms of training principles is that you can only focus on but so many things at a time. That doesn't mean that you don't squat or overhead press. In fact, there are people that run versions of that branded general strength program where one of their deadlift accessories is a low bar squat, because that is a good deadlift accessory if you're like a beginner or more intermediate. Just the same, if you want to continue to work on the overhead press as you continue to run through that program the second time you run it, and it's time for you to switch the overhead press variation out again, just switch it for another overhead press variation. Don't overthink it too much. That's a good question though, because I'm sure a lot of people had it. Next question. This is from my boy Gravity Training. He's been asking this for weeks, and there are thousands of questions, man. I just be forgetting sometimes, but I got you, OG. You're one of my first subscribers, so I always appreciate you. He's actually the reason why y'all have a Patreon too, because he suggested that I make one way back when. So thank my boy GT for that. Give him a sub. Gravity Training. What are your thoughts on pistol squats? So pistol squats are really good. They're really good, especially for guys at home, like in a home gym situation, that have a need for a unilateral exercise that isn't step-ups. Just because some people don't have like a tall enough ledge like you like to use, or box or something, to do step-ups with a reasonable range of motion. You're really looking for below parallel when you do step-ups or, any sort of single leg work, in my opinion, for you to get the most bang for your buck out of it. That being said, I choked on some snow. This big ass snow crystal just fell in my mouth. But you're really looking to train that ATG range of motion. Pistol squats are really good just because You don't need anything but the floor or like a small platform for you to do them on. So that could be like a plate that you're standing on. And then it's giving you a lot of the same benefits. You're working your legs through those particular functions of the quad that we talked about in the leg final answer video. And then you're also working your glutes and your adductors uniquely as well. And it's just allowing you to separate your squat volume from your big, heavy squat volume that's working a particular movement pattern into that unilateral space. So I put it in that S tier, right along with all the other unilateral exercises. Do I think it's going to make you particularly strong on its own? Absolutely not. Do I think it's going to make you particularly big on its own? Absolutely not. But it is an invaluable part of a total training system. Just the same, I don't think really any particular exercise by itself is going to do the job on its own. Everything has to work together as part of a team. So Marvel vs. Capcom 2. For you older cats that played that game. This ain't for the what are you younger cats called? The Gen Zers? Whatever the fuck you're called. There was a game called Marvel vs. Capcom 2. It was like people from Street Fighter and different Capcom games versus the X-Men and different Marvel Comics characters. You had a 3-man squad. Your exercises are your 3-man squad. You had your point character, you had your support, and then you had your anchor. Your anchor, a lot of the time, was just a person that you had on your team solely for the assist because they did something very specific. That's the single leg squats, the pistol squats, or your assault bikes, or your winning warm-ups, or something that you have in your program to fit a particular purpose that no one can do, no one can fulfill, no one can replicate. What I'm saying is that's a long way to say that your team has to be balanced, and pistol squats just offer some of that balance. Last question. This is a great question. If your primary goal is hypertrophy, does leg drive on bench press matter? So, no, in my opinion, no. The only things that you really need to consider with bench press in terms of hypertrophy are am I working the muscles through a full range of motion, and are these muscles firing as well as they could be? In terms of your setup with bench press, in terms of safety, all that you need to consider is there good scapular movement through protraction and retraction? If you think that you just need to purely retract on bench press, I'm not calling you stupid, but you're believing and propagating a stupid cue that you learned from someone that couldn't verbalize what they were doing or what they weren't doing. You're listening to someone that had that fucking bench press where their arms are bent the entire time and their pecs are fucked up and their shoulders are destroyed. That's not a good cue. So all that you need to know is that you need to move your shoulders and that you need to work your muscles adequately. That's for safety and performance. Anything outside of that, leg drive is really just to use more weight in a powerlifting capacity. You don't need to do it for anything relating to hypertrophy. I rarely, if ever, do like my main pressing movement with leg drive. I'll do it with my accessories and things like that, but my main movement is Larson press. The point is that I want to build muscle and I want to build strength in absence of that leg drive, so that when I use leg drive, if I ever wanted competition style bench, I can lift more. But while I'm in my quest for hypertrophy, it's better to work the chest in absence of your legs and everything like that, because it does take away from that stretched end of like the movement pattern. Here's a golden tidbit. Larson press works the fully stretched portion of the contraction better because your legs aren't, assisting in that. So your chest has to just push with that alone. That's why when a lot of people do Larson press, they notice that their lockout gets better, because lockout issues a lot of the time aren't legitimately lockout issues. They're because you weren't strong enough off the chest. So that's why when people do Larson press for a few cycles, they notice that the lockout gets better. Second golden tidbit is that if you want to work that fully shortened contraction, floor press is better. You're breaking up the concentric eccentric chain and you're getting that nicer squeeze at the top. It's to help you bodybuilders out, especially if you're doing a deficit floor press. But this was a great Q&A. Let me know if you have any questions about these questions. I have not forgotten about that every question you've had about lagging muscle groups video. It's still in the works. I'm just trying to find some nice B-roll footage to put in there, but it's going to be a nice long video that you guys are going to enjoy. It's going to be of the same caliber of that every bulking cutting question video that I keep sending to people who fucking ask me about bulking. If your question is, should I bulk? The answer is yes. There's some idiosyncrasies that come into play with that, but for the most part, unless you need to lose some weight, your ass needs to bulk. I appreciate y'all. Have a good one.